Welcome to High Alpha Hooligans, everybody. I'm SCUD. And today, this is a solo video. Way back after episode 1, all the way back at the beginning, we did an episode 1.5, and me and Fifi, at the time, it was just us. Jimmy joined us a little later on. We decided that when things happened that we felt were pertinent, we would just throw a half episode out and cover a topic. That 1.5 was the passing of Val Kilmer. And here we are 18 episodes later, and here's 18.5. I felt compelled to put this out. I really wanted to talk about it. Like I said, the other two guys aren't available tonight, so I just decided I would put this one out myself. This episode, I want to spotlight an aviator who has taken humanity to new heights, literally. So today, in light of the news of the passing of Jim Lovell on August 7th, I wanted to talk about him, Astronaut Jim Lovell. I'm a huge space nerd, so I really wanted to talk about this just because I'm, especially when it comes to the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo missions, that era of NASA spaceflight and the space race, I'm a huge nerd. I've got my NASA meatball shirt on. Back behind me over here, I've got my Apollo Saturn V Lego rocket on. The crawler transporter out of Legos, a mobile launch platform out of Legos, the launch utility tower out of Legos. Up above that, I've got my lunar lander out of Legos. I've got the lunar rover out of Legos. Over here on this side, I've got on my vinyl record player, the now playing sign, I've got the Sounds from the Moon vinyl, which is just audio recordings of some of the communications that took place during the Apollo 11 missions. So I'm a huge space nerd. But this also kind of relates to DCS because Jim Lovell was not just an astronaut. He was a naval aviator. And so I felt compelled, and I find the story compelling. So hopefully you guys agree and enjoy this, wanted to learn or hear about him. If you did, throw some comments in the comment section and let me know your thoughts. So you may know Jim Lovell as the commander of the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission. But his legacy goes far beyond the famous words, "Houston, we've had a problem."
Houston, we have a problem.
Which are, funny enough, misquoted. The initial call was not Jim Lovell saying, "Houston, we have a problem." That has kind of been what people have made it into, and it's become famous as "Houston, we've had a problem." But the initial call was actually made by the command module pilot on Apollo 13, Jack Swigert. And he said, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." After which Houston Mission Control asked them to say again. And that's when Jim Lovell came on and said, "Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt."
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Overhead hatch is closed and the feeder current looks normal. Okay. Fine, again. Go ahead.
This is Houston, say again, please.
I don't know what it was. Okay. DNC, you want to look at it?
Yes, Houston, we've had a problem.
Roger, we're copying it, Capcom. We see a
We've had
hardware.
a main B bus undervolt.
Which, especially since the movie Apollo 13, it's just become "Houston, we've had a problem." And he's kind of famous for that line. But let's rewind. Let's go back way before what he's well known for, which is Apollo 13. Before NASA, Jim Lovell was already cutting through the skies as a naval aviator and a test pilot. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1952 and then soon earned his wings. He cut his fangs flying the McDonnell F-2H Banshee night fighter. He has 107 carrier landings under his belt in that airplane. After flying the Banshee, the Navy made him a transitional instructor pilot, transitioning pilots into other airframes, where he taught in the North American FJ-4 Fury, the McDonnell F-3H Demon, and the VIII F-8U Crusader. And that's all in, I think, like a 6-year period that he's flying these 4 different airframes. But it wasn't just about flying fast jets. Lovell was a methodical, cool under pressure pilot, which made him a perfect fit for his next great achievement. In 1958, so 6 years after graduating from the Naval Academy, he attended what was the Naval Air Test Center, which we now know as the United States Naval Test Pilot School. His class of 20 during test pilot school included other future astronauts, Wally Schirra and Pete Conrad. And those two during test pilot school gave him the nickname Shaky. I don't know why, but that's the nickname they gave him. He graduated top of his class, and then he was assigned as the top of his class to electronics testing. Normally, the top graduate from test pilot school went on to some operational testing, but the electronic warfare side of the Navy, of Naval Aviation, did I say that right? They they complained that they were never getting like the top students. So Jim, being the top student, he was assigned to electronics testing. And in that capacity, he was pivotal in the development of new radar systems. Additionally, as a test pilot, he was assigned as the Navy's program manager for the new McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom. So he was the program manager for the Phantom as the Navy was assessing that new aircraft as it was being developed. So his work helped shape the future of military aviation with radar testing, with the Phantom, and then his time flying these jets. Later that same year, in 1958, so the same year he graduated from test pilot school, he applied for the initial cadre of astronauts for NASA. This initial cadre were known as the Mercury VIII. However, he was not selected due to temporarily high amounts of bilirubin. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to say it anyways, but it's a byproduct of your red blood cells, which have a lifespan of about 120 days. And when your red blood cells die, as they break down, that chemical is released in your body. So at the time he had a high amount of those and was not selected for NASA astronaut, selection. But as we already know, that's not the end of Jim's astronaut story. In 1962, he was selected as part of NASA's second group of astronauts, sometime called the Next Nine. And this was the generation of astronauts that would bridge the gap between the initial Mercury program and what was coming up, which was the Gemini and then Apollo program, which would put us on the moon. Jim's first spaceflight came in 1965 as the pilot of Gemini 7, a mission that demonstrated the viability of long-duration spaceflight. Long-duration spaceflight. Let's talk about this for a second. Jim flew in Mercury 7, and he flew with Frank Borman, I believe it was, for 14 days in the Gemini spaceship, side by side. And if you're not familiar, I'll try to throw pictures up. It's not a very big spaceship. And so I've got a few books I've read on like the history and development of each of these NASA programs. And when they talk about Gemini 7 and 14 days in space, there's some interesting parts to that I think are kind of funny. One, there's certain human biological functions that will take place over the course of 14 days. And in honor of what we do on every single episode of Hooligans, we're talking about poop. And 14 days side by side with your best friend is a long time in a spaceship to have to do those things, which they had to develop how to do this, right? How do we go to the bathroom in space? And so they had collection devices, is what NASA called it. Basically, special bags they would go to the bathroom in. But when we think about it, gravity helps that stuff fall away from us. But in outer space, there's no gravity, so it doesn't fall away. So it's funny reading about them literally side by side in the spaceship, going to the bathroom and having to use like their hand with plastic gloves or something on it and reach between themselves and the bag and like guide the poop into the bag. So 14 days in space in that spaceship, which is just amazing and kind of funny and hysterical. But, it's what you got to do to get us to the moon. Right, Jim? All right. So Gemini 7 wasn't just about long duration spaceflight, but it also pulled off another historic moment in the space race. And that was the first rendezvous in space. Now, this was an unplanned event, kind of. So Gemini 6 was supposed to launch before Gemini 7. And that launch was supposed to be the first rendezvous in space. And that was Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford. And they were going to rendezvous with an unmanned spaceship called the Agena. But as the Agena was launching, which was to precede the Gemini 6 launch, its launch vehicle failed and it exploded on the launch pad. Jim Lovell was actually in mission control when the Agena spaceship exploded on the launch pad. So now we have Gemini 6 and a crew ready to go up and practice rendezvous, and they have no rendezvous vehicle. And so that kind of totally screwed up the whole plan and progress of the Gemini program until somebody at NASA decided, hey, Gemini 7's launching and they're going to be in space for 2 weeks. So what if we just delay the Gemini 6 launch until after Gemini 7? And since they're already going to be up there, we can go ahead and just rendezvous with them. And that's what happened. They renamed Gemini 6 to Gemini 6 Alpha. And Gemini 7 with Jim Lovell launched on December 4th of 1965. And then 2 weeks, 11 days later, I can't do math fast. On December 15th, Gemini 6 Alpha launched and rendezvoused with Jim Lovell and Frank Borman in Gemini 7, which is really cool because it wasn't just a successful completion of rendezvous, but now instead of rendezvousing with an unmanned space vehicle, they're rendezvousing with another crew in another spaceship, and that was the first time that two spacecraft had ever rendezvoused in space. So that was really cool. There's obviously, at this time, astronauts were making huge leaps in technology and discovery and what we could do. And so that's long duration space flight as well as rendezvous, or assisting in the rendezvous by being the rendezvous vehicle. Jim's second space flight was almost a year later in Gemini 12, where he flew for the first time with Buzz Aldrin, which everyone knows Buzz. He was the lunar module pilot on the Apollo 11 mission, second man to walk on the moon. This Gemini 12 mission was to perfect extravehicular activity. So we'd already started to get out of spaceships during the Gemini program earlier before this. Ed White was the first American to do a spacewalk. And there still were difficulties trying to get this whole process figured out. And so Jim Lovell and Buzz Aldrin's Gemini 12 spaceflight helped to perfect that. They solved major problems that NASA had with astronauts floating aimlessly, how to control themselves, getting tangled up in the tethers that were holding onto them. So Jim's work in Gemini 12 helped to prove that astronauts could work effectively outside the spaceship, which was a huge part of going to the moon because we needed to get outside of the spaceship and be able to function outside the spaceship on the lunar surface. Again, as we know, this story isn't over. So Jim moves on from Gemini to Apollo to become an Apollo astronaut. And in 1968, Jim Lovell was a part of Apollo 8. So I think Apollo 8 is really cool. Apollo 8 was originally in the lineup scheduled to be a lunar module test, a lunar module here, to test the lunar module in Earth orbit. So they were going to launch, fly around, test the lunar module, make sure it worked, and when they were all done, they would just come back from Earth orbit. However, as we were getting closer and closer to this mission kicking off, the lunar module was experiencing delays in production. I think it was going to be like from the time that Apollo 8 was ready to launch, the lunar module wasn't going to be ready for like another 3 months or more. And so to keep the progress of the Apollo missions on track, the mission was changed. And in June 1968, they made a decision. So June 1968, the decision is made to change the mission. And 5 months later, in November 1968, Jim Lovell, along with Frank Borman and Will Anders, were taking Apollo 8 to the moon. And so, in a short amount of time to change the mission entirely, and they said, let's just send them to the moon. Let's see if we can put a spaceship in orbit around the moon and bring them safely home. So really interesting story, I think. And think about this for a moment as we kind of talk about Jim Lovell's achievements, right? Jim Lovell was among the first 3 humans to leave Earth's gravity and orbit another celestial body. They were, for the very first time, that anyone has ever left Earth's gravitational force or pull, at least left it enough to be in orbit around the gravity of another celestial body. He was among the first 3 people to ever do that. This was also the first crewed launch. Not crude like it's crude rough, but like crude as in they had people on it. It was the first crewed launch of a Saturn V rocket. That alone is just amazing to be one of the first 3 people to ever ride that monster. He was among the first 3 astronauts to ever see the dark side of the moon in person. And he was among the first 3 astronauts to ever see what is known as Earthrise, which is where the Earth rises from behind the moon. During the Apollo 8 mission, Jim Lovell read from the book of Genesis.
And for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good.
That's not just space travel. That's poetry. And then there was Apollo 13, 1970. Lovell's 4th space flight, and the one that would test every skill that he's ever learned. An oxygen tank en route to the moon exploded and crippled the spacecraft. This is a story most people are pretty familiar with. Jim Lovell, along with his crewmates Jack Swigert and Fred Hayes, worked with Mission Control to turn their lunar landing mission into a dramatic and very improvised rescue mission. The world watched, holding its breath, and they were able to come home. Now, there's some funny things I want to talk about, things I've read, stories that I just think are awesome that go along with this. So, one, I got to meet Gene Kranz, and Gene Kranz was one of the mission directors for Gemini, Apollo, and Mercury. If you've watched the movie Apollo 13, Ed Harris plays him. He's got the vest and the buzz cut. So I got to meet Gene Kranz and listen to him speak, got him to autograph his book for me. And of all of the things he talked about during his speech, one of my favorite things that he said that sticks out in my mind was somebody asked him what was his most memorable moment as a mission director at NASA during this era. And of all the things and the achievements that have been made during his time there, he said, he started telling the story that at the end of every mission, when the mission was successfully completed and the astronauts were on Earth, everyone that worked on the mission would get a little American flag, just like on the wooden stick, just a little, little American flag. You see people wave during 4th of July. And then written on the flag was the mission and the day that it completed with the astronauts safely on the Earth. And he said that, it was the most memorable moment, but it was his most prized possession. That's what it was. But he said that his most prized possession in his collection, in his time at NASA, is a little tiny, cheap American flag on a wooden stick that says Apollo 13 and the date that they were recovered. And he said that is because that was the one he did not think he was going to get. That was the flag that he didn't think he was going to get. I think that's a really awesome story. Here's some other funny stuff. The lunar lander, again, right here, that became a lifeboat, right? The command module was dying. Its batteries were running out. Its oxygen was running out. And so the lunar lander, which is designed to keep 2 people alive for X amount of time, became the lifeboat. In addition to that, the engine on the command module, the service module, wasn't going to get them out of lunar orbit or get them to the moon and around the moon to come back to Earth. And so they had to improvise, and they had to use the engine, the descent engine on the lunar module, to propel them to a speed that would slingshot them around the moon and get them back to Earth, which it wasn't designed for. It wasn't designed to be used in the interim between the Earth and the moon and to put them on a trajectory. It was designed for them to land on the moon. And so North American built the command module, and Grumman built the lunar module. And after the mission was successful and they rescued the astronauts and they were safely back on Earth, as a joke, Grumman sent North American a bill. It was a towing bill. And they charged, in jest, Grumman charged North American $4 for the first mile and $1 for every additional mile after that, plus expenses for using cables on the LEM to recharge the battery on the command module. So they treated it like jumper cables. So we helped tow your vehicle and helped jumpstart it to start the batteries back up. So they sent them a bill, and that total came out to, with that math, with the small fee for the jumper cables, $4 for the first mile and $1 for every additional mile, the charge came out to $312,421.24. So I think that's a hilarious story. If you wanted to see the Apollo 13 command module, it is out there to be seen. It's in a museum in Hutchinson, Kansas, called the Cosmosphere. I've been there a couple times, and I didn't know that the Apollo 13 command module was there the first time I went there. So I'm walking through in awe of all the space stuff, including, they have Gus Grissom's Mercury capsule that sunk and was pulled up off the ocean floor. They have, I think it's Gemini 10. And then I walk into this room and I see an Apollo command module and I'm blown away. And then I walk up and read the plaque, and that's Apollo 13's command module. I was blown away. I'm such a space nerd. And I was so blown away. I had my digital camera with me that, you can't get right up against it. There's a rope keeping you back, and there's plastic covering the open hatch. But I was laying on my back on the floor, angling myself to whatever position I could get so that I could take a picture inside the command module, so I could take a picture of the switch, the oxygen tank stir switch, which is what Jack Swigert flipped that caused the oxygen tank to explode. So very cool. If you're ever near Hutchinson, Kansas, by all means, stop, make time, and go check this museum out. After Apollo 13, Jim Lovell retired from NASA, and he retired from the Navy with the rank of captain. His memoirs, his book, Lost Moon, was what inspired the movie Apollo 13. And if you didn't know this fun fact, Jim Lovell was in the movie Apollo 13. At the end of the movie, when Tom Hanks, who plays Jim Lovell, when they're rescued out of the command module after making it safely back to the Earth, and the helicopter lands on the aircraft carrier, there's an admiral, a gray-haired admiral, that is shaking hands with the astronauts, and that is Jim Lovell in the flesh, making a cameo in the movie. So he's shaking the hand of Tom Hanks, who's playing himself. I love it. But Jim Lovell did not need Hollywood to be a real hero. He was a test pilot who took risks for progress. He was an astronaut who ventured farther from space than anyone had before at that time. And he was a leader who brought his crew home when the odds were against him. I'm saddened to hear of his passing, but I'm happy to share his story with you. So please write some comments if you have any thoughts about him, cool things about his history, or just kind words. Again, just me being who I am, I really wanted to talk about this. And so here we are. No kazoo today. It's just going to be me sending you out. But thank you for listening.